Hey everybody, this is a piece by Jack Omer-Jackaman. The piece is titled Fathom Long Read, A Progressive Pogrom of Shani Louk, Jean Améry, and the anti-Zionist left. For those who don't know who Shani Louk is, let me tell you. On the Wikipedia article for the killing of Shani Louk, it says, on the 7th of October, 2023, during the Reim Music Festival massacre, Shani Louk, a 22-year-old German-Israeli tattoo artist and influencer, was killed. Shortly after the attack, a video circulated showing her body paraded through the streets of Gaza by Hamas militants in the back of a pickup truck. Described by security experts and commentators as Hamas's social media propaganda, it became one of the first viral videos of the Israel-Hamas war. The globally seen images turned into a visual emblem of militants' conduct towards civilians in the 2023 Hamas-led attack on Israel. Attention was also brought to Louk's case through the campaign of her family, which began with her mother, Ricarda, saying that she had received information that Louk was alive and in a Gaza hospital. She appealed to the German government and received responses from top-ranking German officials. German authorities considered Louk to be among their nationals taken hostage during the war. At the end of the month, Israel confirmed Louk's death based on the discovery of a skull fragment on the road leading out of the festival grounds, indicating that she was killed during the attack while trying to escape. Israeli forces found her body in Gaza on the 17th of May, 2024. Events during the Reim Music Festival massacre. On the 7th of October 2023, as a component of the initial incursion in the Israel-Hamas war, Hamas militants crossed into Israel from the Gaza Strip. They carried out a massacre at the Supernova Sukkot Gathering Music Festival. The event was an open-air psychedelic trance festival, coinciding with the final day of Sukkot, 6th of October, and Simchat Torah, 7th of October, and took place in the western Negev Desert, approximately 5 kilometers, 3.1 miles, from the Gaza-Israel barrier, near the Reim kibbutz. Louk was at the festival accompanied by her boyfriend, a Mexican citizen. After the red color rocket warning alarm was sound and the attack began, Louk spoke on the phone with her mother, saying that there were few places to hide and that she would try to find one. She was killed while attempting to reach safety and was reported as missing at the time. Hours later that day, a video emerged showing Louk's body, partially clothed with a significant head injury and blood-matted hair, being paraded in the streets of Gaza City by Hamas militants in the back of a pickup truck. They were exclaiming, Allahu Akbar, and were joined in the cheers by people in the crowd surrounding the vehicle, some of whom spat on the body. The video went viral, becoming one of the first viral videos of the Israel-Hamas war. It was released in a wave of videos of Hamas members parading hostages and bodies. Photographs were also taken and circulated online. According to security experts interviewed by Agence France Presse, the release of the video, along with other videos showing dead or captured civilians, has the character of deliberate and sophisticated propaganda aimed to induce feelings of, quote, helplessness, paralysis, and humiliation, end quote, in the population, and that viral spread of such materials causes amplification of narratives desirable to Hamas. In a New York Times column, Nicholas Kristof discussed the video as an example of the cause of psychological trauma, as the causes of psychological trauma and anger experienced within Jewish communities in the aftermath of the attacks. According to commentator Bobby Gosh, Hamas released propaganda videos quickly, wanting to be the first to score psychological warfare gains. However, the video showing Louk did not demoralize Israeli society, and instead her, quote, treatment at the hands of her captors drew widespread revulsion and reprobation, and if anything strengthened Israeli resolve to exact retribution, end quote. Despite Hamas being banned on Twitter as a terrorist organization, some of its propaganda videos have circulated there after being reposted from other platforms. Journalists discussed the videos showing Louk together with the Hamas-related content that was being shared. In the context of the European Commission's warning to Twitter owner Elon Musk about permitting spread of illegal content. On the 12th of October, the European Commission initiated an investigation against Twitter for dissemination of, quote, violent and terrorist content, end quote, and other forms of illegal content. Associated Press photograph. Before the scene from the viral video as the pickup truck was returning to Gaza Strip, it was photographed by an Associated Press freelance photojournalist. The image showing the vehicle carrying Louk's body and the attackers was included and featured as the first in the series of 20 photographs from the war taken by the Associated Press team of photographers which won the, quote, Team Picture of the Year story, end quote, prize on the 2024 Pictures of the Year International competition. Alright, so I think that's a bit about enough background about Shani Louk. Now I think we can look at the article. I am going to be stopping and pausing if there's terms and words that I'm not familiar with. I'm not going to be doing that for every piece, but every aspect of the piece, but ones that I don't know. So I'm sorry if there's things that you don't know that I skip over, but maybe you don't like me looking things up. But the description, the abstract for this article says, in this Fathom long read, in the wake of the return of Shani Louk's body to Israel, Deputy Editor Jack Omer-Jackaman rereads Jean Améry on left anti-Zionism. He surveys the celebratory responses to the 7th of October pogrom from much of the radical left and finds a, quote, movement and a cast of mind that have lost even the barest connections to the elementary decency, which is the basis of any properly left politics, end quote. So, here's the piece. Every radical generation has its Kronstadt, said the American sociologist Daniel Bell. Has, in other words, that revolutionary movement when, at least for some, the intellectual evasions and moral contortions of the party line become both unavoidable and untenable. Bell was old enough that his Kronstadt was Kronstadt, for others the Moscow trials, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, etc., did the trick. Plenty more refused to acknowledge a Kronstadt movement and went to their graves refusing to concede that there was so much as a flaw, let alone evil, in the Great Liberation. My own Kronstadt, from an era when the Soviet god that failed had been replaced with a new deity in the form of decolonization, was less an event than an idea, or rather the exposure of a dogma posing as an idea. I remember it with crystal clarity, the moment I read Judith Butler's demand that we, quote, that we understand, quote, Hamas/Hezbollah as social movements that are progressive, that are on the left, that are part of a global left, end quote. I knew two things at that moment. First, that decolonization and the campaigns for global justice had not themselves been delegitimized by such insanity, any more than the horrors of the Soviet Union had delegitimized socialism. Second, that while, like Jean Améry, I would always be of the left, I could henceforth play no part in any left that agreed with Butler, and that the rest of my life would in some way be spent engaging in an acrimonious dialogue with it. Any more I have to give, from here on out will, in large part, be devoted to ensuring that the, quote, this is what liberation looks like, end quote, response to the 7th of October becomes this generation's Kronstadt. That's the end of the introduction. I guess this is the first section. With grotesquely appropriate timing, I was in dialogue with the great Jean Améry albeit from beyond the veil. When the news broke of the discovery of Shani Louk's body in one of Gaza's Byzantine networks of tunnels. Améry and I have been reflecting on the roots of the moral degeneracy of the anti-Zionist left, via Marlene Gallner's superb 2022 Améry Compendium, Essays on Anti-Semitism, Anti-Zionism, and the Left. Despite the plethora of writing over the last 8 months bemoaning the left's many embraces of pseudo-revolutionary murder, much of it very good, I have turned to Améry one more than to anyone else in that time. This despite the fact that the great man took his own life in a Salzburg apartment in 1978. The most recent of the essays is from that same year, but Améry saw it all coming, and with greater insight and clarity than those who have actually lived through the last 45 years. Saw, as Alvin Rosenfeld puts it in the collection's introduction, that, quote, the future of the left, indeed its very existence, bracket were, end bracket, endangered by two developments of the late 1960s, the trend, of allying itself with fringe groups that were prone to violence, and its fixation on dialectics and social theory as absolutes, end quote. Améry did not live to see the move from the fringe to center stage and the fixation mutate to an obsession. For his sake, I am rather glad of that, though the rest of us have lost much by his absence. Shani Louk, we have known since late last year, did not live much beyond Hamas's 7th of October siege on the Nova Music Festival. Was likely not alive, in fact, when Ali Mahmoud's camera captured it. Ali Mahmoud's captured, for eternity, her inert semi-clothed body on the back of a Hamas jeep. Her family, who have acted with a superhuman level of grace and dignity throughout, were informed in late November that a fragment of Luke's skull had been found from a portion of the cranium, damage to which makes survival impossible. For 6 months, which must have been interminable, they have been denied the certainty of her body. The degradations to which Luke has been subjected post-mortem pale next to the cardinal sin of the snuffing out of her brutally attenuated and, by all accounts, vital and gentle life. They are nonetheless profound. Mahmoud's obscenely intrusive camera first denied her the privacy and death to which all deceased are entitled. So too it surely multiplied the agonies for her family. The opportunity afforded Mahmoud for such a, quote, iconic, end quote, prize-winning and presumably lucrative image was provided by the two Hamas gangsters who shared the exposed back of a jeep with her corpse on the journey back to Gaza, one bastard clutching one of her dreadlocks as a ghoulish trophy, the other holding a grenade launcher with his boot on her back in the most egregious display of human contempt I think I have ever seen. So much for the degradation of Shani's person. The degradation of her memory began almost immediately. That image went viral, and in the Western context almost exclusively from the, quote, left, end quote, who cherished theories either refused to allow that any tragedy was attendant to her murder, or that in fact it was all rather wonderful. What Améry saw. Since I am sometimes guilty of diluting outrage with irony, let us be crystal clear about what happened, what is still happening. Many on the left excused or else openly celebrated something akin to an Einsatzgruppen action. And if you don't know who the Einsatzgruppen are, Einsatzgruppen, deployment groups, also, quote, task forces, were Schutzstaffel SS paramilitary death squads of Nazi Germany that were responsible for mass murder primarily by shooting during World War II, 1939 to 1945 in German-occupied Europe. The Einsatzgruppen had an integral role in the implementation of the so-called, quote, final solution to the Jewish question, end quote. Die Endlösung der Judenfrage, in territories conquered by Nazi Germany, and were involved in the murder of much of the intelligentsia and cultural elite of Poland, including members of the Catholic priesthood. Almost all of the people they murdered were civilians, beginning with the intelligentsia and swiftly progressing to Soviet political commissars, Jews, and Romani people, as well as actual or alleged partisans throughout Eastern Europe. Later, the direction of the Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler and the supervision of SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, the Einsatzgruppen operated in territories occupied by the Wehrmacht, German armed forces, following the invasion of Poland in September 1939 and the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. The Einsatzgruppen worked hand in hand with the Order police battalions on the Eastern Front to carry out operations ranging from the murder of a few people to operations which lasted over 2 or more days, such as the massacre of Babi Yar, with 33,771 Jews murdered in 2 days, and the Rumbula massacre, about 25,000 Jews murdered in 2 days of shooting. As ordered by Nazi leader Adolf Hitler, the Wehrmacht cooperated with the Einsatzgruppen, providing logistical support for their operations, and participated in the mass murders. Historian Raoul Hilberg estimates that between 1941 and 1945, the Einsatzgruppen, related agencies, and foreign auxiliary personnel murdered more than 2 million people, including 1.3 of the 5.5 to 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust. After the close of World War II, 24 officers, including multiple commanding officers of the Einsatzgruppen, were prosecuted in the Einsatzgruppen trial in 1947-48, charged with crimes against humanity and war crimes. 14 death sentences and 2 life sentences were handed out. However, only 4 of these death sentences were carried out. 4 additional Einsatzgruppe leaders were later tried and executed by other nations. So that's who the Einsatzgruppe is, if you didn't know who that was. So back to the text. Yes, the left, my home, Améry's home, by all accounts Louk's home, and part of the political spectrum on which his Viennese critic Alfred Pogrom had it, quote, the heart of humanity beats, end quote. Let not their high-minded post-colonial rhetoric cloak the ugly reality. They exulted at mass murder and rape. Alfred Pogrom, Wikipedia says, was an Austrian-born columnist, theater critic, writer, and occasionally translator. This is why my being with Améry on receipt of the news was so appallingly apt, and why he and Shani will, I believe, remain synonymous for me from here on. Footnote. The unwanted serendipity continued. As I began writing this essay, news came through that the body of Louk's boyfriend, Orion Hernandez Radu, had been found. I missed some footnotes that I'll read real quick. I don't know what they're connected to. The journey towards Kronstadt had in fact begun a little earlier when, amid the hell into which Iraq was plunged by sectarian insurgency in the mid-2000s, it became clear to me that many of those with whom I had marched against the Anglo-American War seemed less to be heartbroken that their warnings had proven justified, and more to actually want the jihadi insurgents to win. And the other footnote said, Fathom editor Alan Johnson reminded me that this vile degradation also called to mind the moment in Primo Levi's If This Is a Man, in which an SS officer wipes his hands on Levy as though he were a rag. Okay, so back to end footnote. For Améry always maintained, though at his time of writing he admitted he could not prove it, that the anti-Zionist left was at best complacent and at worst enthusiastic about the prospect of a second Jewish genocide. The reaction of much of the far or anti-Zionist left to the events of the Black Shabbat would have removed all doubt from Améry's mind. Black Shabbat, I believe that's the execution of the Israeli athletes. One second. Sorry. Shit. Come on, man. I'm trying to figure this thing out. Come on. I believe this is what it's being referred to. The Munich Massacre was a terrorist attack carried out during the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich, West Germany, by 8 members of the Palestinian militant organization Black September, who infiltrated the Olympic Village, killed 2 members of the Israeli Olympic team, and took 9 others hostage. Black September called the operation, quote, Ikrit and Biram. Footnote says dubious disgust, end quote. After 2 Palestinian Christian villages whose inhabitants were expelled by the Israeli Defense Forces during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The Black September commander was Lutif Afif, who was also their negotiator. West German neo-Nazis gave the group logistical assistance. I'm going to repeat that. West German neo-Nazis gave the group logistical assistance. Shortly after the hostages were taken, Afif demanded the release of 234 Palestinian prisoners who were being held in Israeli jails, plus the West German imprisoned founders of the Red Army faction, Andreas Baader and Ulrike Meinhof. West German police ambushed the terrorists, killed the 5 of the 8 Black September members, but the rescue attempt failed and all the hostages were killed. A West German policeman was also killed in the crossfire, and the West German government was criticized for poor execution of its rescue attempt and its overall handling of the incident. The 3 surviving perpetrators were Adnan al-Ghashi, Jamal al-Ghashi, and Mohammed Safadi, who were arrested only to be released the next month in the hostage exchange that followed the hijacking of Lufthansa Flight 615. By then, the Israeli government had launched an assassination campaign which authorized Mossad to track down and kill anyone who had played a role in the attack. 2 days prior to the start of the 2016 Summer Olympics, in a ceremony led by Brazilian and Israeli officials, the International Olympic Committee honored the 11 Israelis and 1 German who were killed at Munich. In the 2020 Summer Olympics, a moment of silence was observed in the opening ceremony. I'm not sure, maybe Black Shabbat is referring to something else, but the sentence that just read, the reaction of much of the far or anti-Zionist left to the events of the Black Shabbat should have removed all doubt from Améry's mind. The reason I'm saying that is because one of the, I can't remember what the actual title of the piece are, but Ulrike Meinhof wrote a piece like, celebrating or supporting the execution of the Jewish Israeli hostages by was the group called by Black September, and the historian of anti-Semitism in Germany calls this document one of the most important primary source documents of post-war anti-Semitism. And so, just as a side note, when there's a radical left in Germany that talks about that's cognizant of anti-Semitism and how anti-Semitism pertains to commentary on and politics towards Israel, this is the kind of like political milieu that they're coming from. This idea that the West German or German general like radical left was just so bent out of shape about the Holocaust, and that's why a decent segment of them now support Israel, if not things that Israel does, Israel's existence. It's because it comes from this longer history of very, very strong moments of anti-Semitism being prevalent on the left, including the bombing of a Jewish community center by, I think it's the Revolutionary Cells, I'm not sure. I don't think it was RAF. But on the anniversary of Kristallnacht, as an act of like solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. This is the kind of milieu that the West German left comes out, like the constellation of anti-Semitism that the West German left and the East German left come out of. So the idea that certain segments of the radical left, they just are continuing this tradition of unreasonable German guilt about the Holocaust is just fucking cheese. Anyway, back to the text. Quote, "Where barbarism begins, even existential commitments must end," end quote. He wrote elsewhere, "Not a bad credo for left-wing solidarity with armed resistance." He being Améry. But no, Jean. For the anti-Zionist, where barbarism begins, then the fun can start. That the far left's dishonor is not especially new is attested by Améry's preoccupation with it in the years before his suicide. Already in 1969, Améry was noting that the anti-Zionist obsession was not merely coterminous with, but essential to, the, quote, new left, end quote, Weltanschauung. What, quote, in the past, ... was considered the socialism of fools, end quote, Améry wrote, was by then, quote, evolving into an integrative constituent of socialism per se, and the socialists of their own free volition are universally turning themselves into fools, end quote. Améry. It took the extraordinary David Nirenberg in his book Anti-Judaism to illustrate that there were actually very few aspects of Western civilization to which anti-Semitism was not a, quote, integrative constituent, end quote. David Nirenberg is a medievalist and intellectual historian. He is the director of and Leon Levy professor at the Institute at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. David Nirenberg previously taught at the University of Chicago, where he was dean of the Divinity School, and Deborah R. Edgar D. Janota, distinguished service professor of medieval history in the Committee on Social Thought, as well as the former executive vice provost of the university, dean of the Social Sciences Division, and the founding Roman family director of the Neubauer Family Collegium for Culture and Society. He is also appointed to the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures, the Center for Middle Eastern Study, the Joyce Z. and Jacob Greenberg Center for Jewish Studies. Nirenberg is notable for his landmark analysis in 2013 of anti-Judaism as a constitutive principle of the Western tradition, and his argument about a longue durée approach to historical understanding, a career about-face from the methodological approach taken in his 1996 work, Communities of Violence, Persecution of Minorities in the Middle Ages. Nirenberg has a particular interest in Christian, Jewish, and Muslim thought in medieval Europe. In 2024, he was elected to the American Philosophical Society. his book Anti-Judaism. The description for that book says, come on. Internet's being goofy. It's about to tornado here. This incisive history upends the complacency that confines anti-Judaism to the ideological extremes in the Western tradition. With deep learning and elegance, David Nierenberg shows how foundational anti-Judaism is to the history of the West. Questions of how we are Jewish, and more critically, how and why we are not, have been churning within the Western imagination throughout its history. Ancient Egyptians, Greeks and Romans, Christians and Muslims of every period, even the secularists of modernity, have used Judaism in constructing their vision of the world. The thrust of this tradition construes Judaism as an opposition, a danger often from within to be criticized, attacked, and illuminated. The intersections of these ideas with the whole world of power, the Roman destruction of the Second Temple, the Spanish Inquisition, the German Holocaust, are well known. The ways of thought underlying these tragedies can be found at the very foundation of Western history. So that's David Nierenberg in his book Anti-Judaism. That things have developed, and that what is now full gangrene was in Améry's time a well-set but not complete poisoning of the body politic. Améry himself makes clear from beyond the grave, reflecting on the left's shift from an anti-fascist to a supposedly anti-colonial focus. He wrote in 1976 that, quote, "Only a moment ago, it seemed natural to support the Israelis' right to their own state. Suddenly one is struck by the fact that this support has become a veritable test of courage. Indeed, tomorrow it might well be considered positively offensive," end quote. That's absolutely fucking true. That's insightful. That tomorrow is now well past. Jean, and offensive, that tomorrow is now well past, Jean, and offensive it is to a substantial, vocal, and influential body of leftist thought. A left which would excuse fascists. New section. Much has already been written about the left's 2023 autumnal disgrace, but so profound was it, so profound is it still, that there can be no such thing as oversaturation. It is a treason which I cannot and will not forget, and if I am a little late in calling attention to it, is because for some of us the road between heartbreak and coherence is a little longer than for others. That it was a treason of the intellectuals is, as the French philosophe Julien Benda knew, all the worse. Julien Benda, according to Wikipedia, lived from 1867 to 1956, was a French philosopher and novelist known as an essayist and cultural critic. Julien Benda is best known for his short book, 1927, The Treason of the Intellectuals, or The Betrayal of the Intellectuals. Nor did it appear from a cold blue sky, and so too does it have impact far beyond the shores of Israel and the Palestinian territories. Now back to the text. Nor did it appear from a cold blue sky, and so too does it have impact far beyond the shores of Israel and the Palestinian territories. For the second time in 3 years, the far left was faced with an unimpeachable fascist enemy. Both occasions, much of it has chosen the side of the fascists. The response of the anti-Zionist left to Russia's attempted amputation of Ukraine has been, in some respects, worse even than their response to the 7th of October, while sharing a similar taste for despotic strongmen. It is not every generation of leftists that is faced with so clear and unequivocal a case of reactionary aggression. Orwell's generation faced it repeatedly. Then, too, many lacked his fortitude in being able to look it squarely in the face. As good and brave left liberal writers like Timothy Snyder, Timothy Garton Ash, and Paul Mason have repeatedly warned us, the same cohort which celebrated or otherwise excused the Hamas pogrom would also sacrifice the valiant people of Ukraine on the altar of a banal, vapid anti-Westernism which holds that anything which purports to be, quote, anti-imperialist, end quote, is virtuous. Timothy Snyder wrote a book called Badlands. Bloodlands. I'll read his little Wikipedia entry. Timothy David Snyder, who was born in 1969, is an American historian specializing in the history of Central and Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, and the Holocaust. He is Richard C. Levin Professor of History at Yale University and a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. Snyder has written several books, including Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin, On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, The Road to Unfreedom, and Armality. Several of them have been described as bestsellers. Snyder serves as on the Committee of Conscience of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Timothy Snyder is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Timothy Garton Ash, CMG FRSA, born July 1955, is a British historian, author, and commentator. He is Professor of European Studies at the University of Oxford. Most of Timothy Garton Ash's work has been concerned with the contemporary history of Europe, with a special focus on Central and Eastern Europe. Timothy Garton Ash has written about the former communist regimes of that region, their experience with the secret police, the revolutions of 1989, and the transformation of former Eastern Bloc states into member states of the European Union. Timothy Garton Ash has also examined the role of Europe in the world and the challenge of combining political freedom and diversity, especially in relation to free speech. Paul Mason. Oh, I know that guy. He made some really shitty videos about key concepts from Marx for the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, and it's fucking terrible. But maybe I'm wrong. Paul Mason, born 23rd of January 1960, is a British journalist. He writes a weekly column at the New European and monthly columns for Social Europe and Frankfurter Rundschau. He was business correspondent and then economics editor of the BBC Two television program Newsnight from 2001 and culture and digital editor of Channel 4 News from 2013, becoming the program's economics editor in 2014. Paul Mason left Channel 4 in 2016. Paul Mason is the editor of several books and a visiting professor at the University of Wolverhampton, as well as a prospective political candidate. So yeah, that's who Paul Mason is. Paul Mason, I think, has pieces in Raya Dunayevskaya, a book about Raya Dunayevskaya. Anyway, back to the text. As good and brave liberal left writers like Timothy Snyder, Timothy Garton Ash, and Paul Mason have repeatedly warned us, the same cohort which celebrated or otherwise excused the Hamas pogrom would also sacrifice the valiant people of Ukraine on the altar of a banal, vapid anti-Westernism which holds that anything which purports to be, quote, anti-imperialist, end quote, is virtuous. They are also, of course, largely the same people who served as Assad's useful idiots a decade ago when he embarked on the mass slaughter of his own people. For an honourable alternative far-left example, note how the UK's Alliance for Workers' Liberty has stood solidly with the people of Ukraine and forcefully condemned Hamas and protest Israel's war in Gaza. It is perhaps no surprise that this left is so blasé about the prospect of a Trump victory that they would advocate turning away from Biden and handing victory to the greatest threat to Western order since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Trump at least has the good grace to be fairly transparent that he would sacrifice the Ukrainians for the simple reason that he doesn't give a damn. This left has had the nerve to try to cloak their sacrificing of a sovereign people's heroic struggle in the respectable garb of a desire for, quote, peace, end quote. The Ukrainian people know what kind of peace this would be, and that, as Rousseau had it, quote, tranquility is to be found in dungeons, end quote. Rousseau. New section. The exhilaration of a pogrom. I make a request of the reader here, that after each and every one of the examples that follow, you digest the words alongside the image of Luke on that truck. I know that I am in many ways engaging in the same intrusion of her privacy and dignity by exhorting you to do this, and I beg her forgiveness. She deserves better than to be used as a prop to illustrate the horrors of those who rejoiced in her death. Similarly, I know that every one of the 1,189 slain and each of the 252 hostages, 37 of whom are now also presumed dead, possess their own unique and equal tragedy, but rather appropriately for an essay on a left which can accurately be described as Stalinist, there is some truth in the monster's dictum that while one death is a tragedy, mass death becomes a statistic. I would not give the reader that get-out, but have them face squarely the tragedy in the person of Shani. There was something about the Nova massacre, in particular which seemed especially excite the anti-Zionist left, just as there was something in particular which appalled the rest of us. Though I have never relished it myself, I have always found something joyous and life-affirming in others' communal acts of youthful hedonism. Young people united, however temporarily, in pleasurable abandon and the satisfaction simply of being alive and together. Into such a scene came the killers, murdering, raping, and dismembering with equally gay abandon. Is this conjunction of innocent and evil pleasure which I find so sickeningly unforgettable? Quote, where dance is, there is the devil, end quote, said John Chrysostom, the Christian church father who was, in many ways, the original anti-Semite. John Chrysostom. Wikipedia says John Chrysostom, who lived from 347 to 407 AD, was an important early church father who served as Archbishop of Constantinople. John Chrysostom is known for his preaching and public speaking, his denunciation of abuse of authority by both ecclesiastical and political leaders, his divine liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, and his ascetic sensibilities. The epithet Chrysostomos, anglicized as Chrysostom, means, quote, golden-mouthed, end quote, in Greek and denotes his celebrated eloquence. Chrysostom was among the most prolific authors in the early Christian church. Chrysostom is honored as a saint in the Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, Catholic, Anglican, and Lutheran churches, as well as in some others. The Eastern Orthodox Church, together with the Byzantine Catholics, hold Chrysostom in special regard as one of the the three holy hierarchs, including Basil the Great and Gregory of Nazianzus. The feast days of John Chrysostom in the Eastern Orthodox Church are 14th of September, 13th of November, and 27th of January. In the Roman Catholic Church, he is recognized as a doctor of the Church, because the date of his death is occupied by the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross, 14th of September. The general Roman calendar celebrates him since 1970 on the previous day, 13th of September. From the 13th century to 1969, it did so on the 27th of January, the anniversary of the translation of his body to Constantinople. Of other Western churches, including Anglican provinces and Lutheran churches, some commemorate him on the 13th of September, others on the 27th of January. John Chrysostom is honored on the calendars of the Church of England and the Episcopal Church on the 13th of September. The Coptic Church also recognizes him as a saint, with feast days on the 16th Thout and 17th Hathor. So that's who John Chrysostom is. Quote, "Where dance is, there is the devil," end quote, says John Chrysostom, the Christian church father who was in many ways the original anti-Semite. If you're looking for something to listen to for fun, not for serious thought, there's a radio play with Peter Lorre. It's like 30 minutes long. It was from a radio show in like the 40s or 50s, I think, with Peter Lorre, who's the famous actor known for playing the role of M. A Fritz Lang movie. I believe it was a Fritz Lang movie. I can't remember. Some famous German director's movie, which is a phenomenal film as well. But there's a piece called The Lodger, which is about this serial killer, this misogynistic serial killer who's going around killing young girls who engage in dancing, because dancing is thought to be the corrupter of men, corrupter of civilization, corrupter of the religious community, or the religious civilization. So, back to the text, enough of my rambling on. John Chrysostom meant it in the same way that all pious totalitarians mean to restrict pleasure. But at Nova, the Golden Tongue's words attained a much more literal accuracy. As we just saw, John Chrysostom's was called the Golden Tongue. Many saw nothing so horrific in Nova, quite the reverse. Shani Louk and her fellow victims were not even cold when on the 7th of October, UC Merced Associate Professor of History and Critical Race and Ethnic Studies, Sean Malloy, retweeted the following observation on the brutal slaughter of Luke and other hedonistic youngsters at the Nova party from @DunksDo. Quote, "Imagine you're drinking an $18 sparkling water called Butterfly Mist, rolling on the worst Molly ever stamped and listening to EDM from the Bush administration. When Hamas guys start dropping out of the sky, that's the kind of shit in the Old Testament meant God is mad at you," end quote. End quote. If that's not an anti-Semitic statement, I mean, I don't know what the fuck is. Sean L. Malloy's books are Out of Oakland, Black Panther Party Internationalism During the Cold War, and Atomic Tragedy, Henry L. Stimson and the Decision to Use the Bomb Against Japan. Take a look and pause and let that vile slacker posing sink in. ... It's back to the text. Take a pause and let that vile slander posing sink in. And now rejoin me for more of the same. Louk's body had been dragged back to Gaza, spat upon and sequestered God knows where by that time. On the 8th of October, when a speaker at the All Out for Palestine Bacchanal in New York offered the whooping crowd the following, quote, "As you might have seen, there was some sort of rave or desert party where they were having a great time until the resistance came in electrified hang gliders and took at least several dozen hipsters," end quote. This was a protest. I was looking for something. This was a protest with accompanying swastikas promoted by the Democratic Socialists of America. And lo, how I wept with the ghost of Michael Harrington and Irving Howe. Footnote. Democratic Socialists both. Harrington founded the DSA and Howe as one of its most eminent members. Both would, I am quite certain, be appalled by the post-7th October conduct of a once venerable organization. You're goddamn right they would be. I was not a member, but I followed the Discord of the Discord of the YDSA, the college I went to back, and it was just full of Stalinists. Like it was just Stalinists trying to hop onto an existing party or an existing organization in order to turn it into a very reactionary and authoritarian vessel. That was my experience with DSA. Back to the text. Note the thrill in both responses. These innocent young people were not merely expendable as eggs whose breaking facilitates the great liberationary omelet. That would be awful enough, but no, there is real joy here. Real pleasure at the massacre of an antiseptic cleansing. At the massacre as an antiseptic cleansing. It's not only, quote, they must die, end quote, but, quote, they deserve to die, end quote. In doing so, it goes beyond standard far-left dogma to the language of Untermensch. It is in vain that we and their families proclaim the innocence of the murdered, the raped, and the kidnapped. Quote, settlers are not civilians. This is not hard, end quote, tweeted Zarina Gruwal, Associate Professor of American Studies, Ethnicity, Race and Migration, and Religious Studies at Yale University. Zarina Gruwal is a historical anthropologist and documentary filmmaker whose work focuses on Islam in the United States. Zarina A. Gruwal is an associate professor of American Studies, Religious Studies, and Ethnicity, Race, and Migration at Yale University. Wikipedia says, in October 23, Gruwal gained national attention after she expressed support on Twitter for the 2023 Hamas-led attack on Israel, saying the Palestinians had, quote, every right to resist through armed struggle, end quote. Grual also wrote that those killed were not civilians, which would include children and elders because they are Israeli, tweeting, quote, "Settlers are not civilians. This is not hard," end quote, in response to a Sky News journalist tweet insisting, quote, "Civilians are civilians are civilians. Doesn't matter where," end quote. After the attack, a petition created by a Yale student to remove Grual from her faculty position garnered more than 55,000 signatures. In response, a Yale spokesperson said that the university was, quote, "committed to freedom of expression," end quote. Grual claimed that her post had been, quote, "wildly taken out of context," end quote, and denied being a Hamas supporter. Grual's tweets were later cited as an example of anti-Semitism on campus in an open letter signed by 1,400 Yale alumni, faculty, and parents. I mean, say what you will about whether or not she should be fired or not, but that is hate speech. That is hate speech. Back to the text. When I saw this tweet, having first lifted jaw from floor, my mind immediately went to a recollection of the American pragmatist philosopher Sidney Hook. In a famous moment which really should be better remembered, Bertolt Brecht, then about as venerated a playwright and socialist as Europe had to offer, went to visit Hook in New York in 1935. The conversation turned, as it was wont to do in left-wing circles in those days, to the Moscow trials. Hook having opined on the horror of innocent comrades being shot, Brecht purportedly replied, quote, "The more innocent they are, the more they deserve to be shot," end quote. Having ensured he had understood the great playwright correctly, Hook promptly slung him out. Hook promptly slung him out, also correctly. The point should be moot, but which of the over 1,189 dead and 252 kidnapped was Grual identifying as, quote, "settlers," end quote? Answer: all Israelis are settlers, and in Grual's estimation, all are thus ripe for slaughter. The academic Balazs Berkowitz, he has some good, it's maybe Berkowitz, but he has pieces on the internet which are very good. Try and look him up real quick. Maybe I'm saying it wrong. Balazs Berkowitz. This is his bio from the London Center for Anti-Semitism. Balazs Berkowitz, research fellow, was born in Budapest, lives in Tel Aviv. Balazs, I don't know how to fucking say that name. Balazs Berkowitz is currently a researcher at the Stephen Roth Institute, Tel Aviv University, at the Bucharest Institute, University of Haifa. He is a member of the editorial board of the journal K, Jews, Europe, and the 21st Century. Berkowitz was trained as a philosopher and a sociologist in Hungary and France. He wrote his PhD in the philosophy of Michel Foucault and obtained a nationalism studies degree at the Central European University, Budapest. I actually had a professor that actually went to that same program. He has published on topics related to social theory, the epistemology of the social sciences, and anti-Semitism. He is currently working on a study on the reemergence of the, quote, "Jewish problem," end quote, in contemporary works of philosophical and social and political criticism, as well as on various projects that deal with the relationship between conspiracy theories, critique, and anti-Semitism. As a journalist, he occasionally writes about the political and social situation in contemporary Hungary. Back to the text. The academic Balazs Berkowitz summarized this kind of unvictiming of Israelis rather neatly and with fully appropriate horror. Quote, "This non-recognition of the victim status of Israelis and Jews is doubly anti-Semitic," end quote. He wrote, quote, "It not only rests on anti-Semitic presuppositions, but also potentially yields the most extreme anti-Semitic consequences. The perspective essentially strips Jews of their humanity, portraying Jews as being incapable of becoming victims. Consequently, it rationalizes any harm inflicted upon them, given that the concepts of, quote, Jew and victim, the concepts of, quote, Jew and, quote, victim are seen as mutually exclusive. The viewpoint also paves the way for justifying and potentially endorsing all future acts of violence against them. In contrast, this thinking automatically absolves even its most inhumane and barbarian enemies who in any other context would be considered as the enemy of humanity as a whole. This is worse than Holocaust denial. This is outright justification of all potential Holocaust, end quote. Thus, being merely a demonstrably gentle and decent person, and a conscientious objector, incidentally, Louk's life meant nothing, and not being accepted as one of the wretched of the earth, and Jews never are, Louk may be killed and her body degraded, not only with impunity, but with glory. Further joy followed, and from more eminent sources than Malloy, Joseph Massad, professor of modern Arab politics and international history at Columbia University, had a full day to properly process what had unfolded when he said, quote, "Perhaps the major achievement of the resistance in the temporary takeover of these settler colonies is the deathblood any confidence that Israeli colonists had in their military and its ability to protect them." Wikipedia says Joseph Andoni Massad, born 1963 as a Jordanian academic specializing in Middle Eastern studies who served as professor of modern Arab politics and intellectual history in the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies at Columbia University. Joseph Massad's academic work is focused on Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli nationalism. Massad was born in Jordan in 1963 and is of Palestinian Christian descent. He received his PhD in political science from Columbia University in 1998. He is known for his book Desiring Arabs, about the representation of sexual desire in the Arab world. I'm looking at his Wikipedia. It says Massad refers to the Palestinian Authority as, quote, the Palestinian Collaborationist Authority, end quote, calls Mahmoud Abbas the, quote, chief Palestinian collaborator, end quote, and accuses the Palestinian Authority of collaborating with Israel and the United States to crush Palestinian resistance. In October 2023, Massad wrote an essay in Electronic Intifada on the Hamas attacks on Israel that was characterized by the Jerusalem Post, Business Insider, the ADL, and the New Arab as supporting the attacks. He said he received death threats in a petition to Columbia to remove him from his post was signed by over 50,000 people, but he was defended by the Middle East Studies Association. Russell Rickford, associate professor, back to the text. Russell Rickford, associate professor of history at Cornell University, had even longer, asking a protest on the 15th of October, quote, "What has Hamas done?" end quote. In answer, he said, quote, "Hamas has shifted the balance of power. Hamas has punctured the illusion of invincibility. That's what they've done. You don't have to be a Hamas supporter to recognize that. Hamas has changed the terms of the debate. Israel officials are right. Nothing will be the same again. Nothing will be the same again. Hamas has challenged the monopoly of violence." End quote. Russell Rickford. Russell Rickford continued, quote, "In those first few hours, even as horrific acts were being carried out, many of which we would not learn about until later, there were many thousands of goodwill, many Palestinians conscious who abhor violence, as do you, as do I, who abhor the targeting of civilians, as do you, as do I, who were able to breathe, exclamation point. They were able to breathe for the first time in years, exclamation point. It was exhilarating. It was exhilarating, it was energizing. And if they weren't exhilarated by this challenge to the monopoly of violence, by this shifting of the balance of power, then they would not be human. I was exhilarated," end quote. Parenthesis. I quote Russell Rickford in full, as most have not, for reasons of fairness and because his professed abhorring of violence against civilians does not much exculpate him in any case. Russell J. Rickford, born in 1975, is an American scholar and activist who is associate professor in the history department at Cornell University. He has written the only in-depth biography of Betty Shabazz, the wife of Malcolm X. Rickford's research focuses on the black radical tradition and on black liberal culture after World War II. Russell Rickford lectures on American social and political history, among other subjects. In the Wikipedia, his remarks on the 2023 Hamas attack, it says, in October 2023, a video was publicized of Russell Rickford speaking on the 15th of October rally held in support of Palestinians after the 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, where, according to the Telegraph, he, quote, appeared to refer to the massacre of more than 1,400 Israelis on October 7th by the terrorist group as a, quote, challenge to the monopoly of violence, end quote. Russell Rickford also said, quote, it was exhilarating, end quote. Cornell officials issued statements over the next several days condemning Russell Rickford's remarks. On October 18th, the Cornell Daily Sun published a letter from Russell Rickford in which he wrote, quote, I apologize for the horrible choice of words that I used in a portion of a speech that was intended to stress grassroots African American, Jewish, and Palestinian traditions of resistance to oppression, end quote. By October 20th, U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and U.S. Representative Claudia Tenney also called for Rickford to be fired. A semester leave of absence for Rickford was announced on October 21st. Back to the text. I do not know if the heady intoxication has now worn off, or if these ghouls felt the same exhilaration watching the footage recently released by the families of IDF spotters Liri Albag, Karina Ariev, Agam Berger, Daniela Gilboa, and Nam Levy, kidnapped from the Nahal Oz base. The Nahal Oz attack, this is Wikipedia, the Nahal Oz attack was an assault on the kibbutz of Nahal Oz and the adjacent military base near the northern Gaza Strip on the morning of the 7th of October 2023 as part of a 2023 Hamas-led attack on Israel. In the attack, more than 60 Israeli soldiers and more than a dozen kibbutz residents were killed. Some soldiers and residents were kidnapped and taken to the Gaza Strip. Footnote. I link to a video here when I deliberately did not link a viral photo of Shani Louk for the simple reason that the families of the five are desirous that it be shown as much as possible to remind the world and their government of their desperate situation. In it, the five young men, clad in pajamas, not one of them out of their teens, three visibly bloodied, are shown utterly terrified. There is a moment in it when Berger looks at the camera, her face fixed with one of the most abject expressions I can recall. It haunts me. These are the most fearsome and guilty apparatchiks of the omnipresent Zionist entity, laid low by the brave insurgency. A note on the horror of the 7th of October being such a thoroughly and narcissistically self-filmed outrage, we are watching Nam Levy's October 7th play out like a horror film made by Christopher Nolan. For the last 8 months, our last pre-captivity image of her was her being dragged savagely by the hair into a jeep, soaked in blood, while a baying mob rushed to get a good look at her torment. Now 8 months into her hell, we see the moments from hours before. Wikipedia says, the kidnapping of Nama Levy, Naama Levy, I don't know how to say it. It might be Nama, it might be Naama, I'm not sure, is an Israeli soldier serving in the Israeli Defense Forces. On the morning of 7th of October 2023, during the Hamas attack on Israel, terrorists abducted her from the IDF surveillance base at Nahal Oz near the Gaza-Israel barrier. Later that day, Hamas released footage on social media showing Levy in the Gaza Strip with her hands tied behind her back as armed militants dragged her from the truck of a Jeep and forced her inside the vehicle. One of the first viral videos of the Israel-Hamas war. The footage showed Levy with multiple visible injuries, including injuries to her ankles. A large blood stain on the seat of her gray sweatpants led to widespread concern that she had been raped or sexually assaulted. Images from the footage have come to symbolize sexual violence against Israeli women during the attacks. As of May 2024, Levy is presumed to be among the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Levy's family continued their efforts to secure her release. On the 22nd of May 2024, the Hostages and Missing Families Forum released a 3-minute video that compiled footage taken from Hamas militants' body cams on the morning of the 7th of October. The video shows Levy The video shows Levy and 4 other female Israeli soldiers, all aged 18 or 19 years old, bloodied and with their hands tied before they were taken from Nahal Oz lookout base. Some family members have accused the IDF of inadequate security protocols and safety measures at the base that they believe contributed to the death or abduction of 22 surveillance soldiers on the 7th of October. Back to the text. These are professors, and they are not the only ones. The academic calling is both an immense privilege and in its opportunity for the molding of young minds, a tremendous responsibility. Can it be that the role has been so widely debased that such educators are comfortable cheerleading pogrom chicks, are happy to ape the Cossack mama whooping on the pitchfork-wielding mob? Whooping on the pitchfork-wielding mob. Leftist fetish for, quote, revolutionary, end quote, violence is nothing new, of course. The current vogue may be for Fanon, but one can find much the same in the works of much earlier Marxists. In George Sorel, for whom violence was a vital proletarian impulse far beyond the understanding of the humanistic rationalism of what he contemptuously dismissed as, quote, bourgeois philosophy, end quote. Or the Peruvian Marxist J.C. Mariátegui, who wrote in condemnation of the moderation of the Internationale, quote, of the Second International, quote, if the revolution demands violence, authority, discipline, I am all for violence, authority, discipline. I accept them in block form with all their horrors without any cowardly reserves, end quote. Wikipedia says, Jose Carlos Mariátegui Lachira, who lived from 1894 to 1930, was a Peruvian writer, journalist, politician, and Marxist philosopher. A prolific author despite his early death, Amauta, from Quechua, Hamauta, quote, teacher, end quote, a name by which he is also known in his country. He is considered one of the greatest scholars of Latin America. His 7 interpretive essays on Peruvian reality from 1928, a synthesis of his thought, became a reference work for the intelligentsia of the continent. Jose Carlos Mariátegui was the founder of the Peruvian Socialist Party and the General Confederation of Workers of Peru in 1927 and 1929, respectively. The PSP initially adhered to Mariáteguism for a syndicalist influenced socialism, quote, without tracing or copying, end quote, but after Mariátegui's death in 1928, it would be reformed as the Peruvian Communist Party to be in line with the Comintern's rigid party policy and Marxism-Leninism. In 1930, the party's wing, loyal to Mariátegui, would split and form the Socialist Party of Peru. For the sociologist and philosopher Michael Luvy, Mariátegui is, quote, undoubtedly the most vigorous and original Marxist thinker that Latin America has ever known, end quote. Along the same lines, Jose Pablo Feynman, Argentine philosopher and cultural critic, declared him, quote, the greatest Latin American Marxist philosopher, end quote. Back to the text. The Fennoist post-colonial emphasis was certainly emergent by the time Tariq Ali, the street-fighting man himself, enthused in 2006 of the ascendancy of Muqtada, Hania, Nasrallah, Ahmadinejad, that, quote, a radical wind is blowing from the alleys and shacks of the latter-day wretched of the earth. Tariq Ali being on the conservative end of orthodox of Trotskyism, being an orthodox Trotskyist, drawing his interpretation of left history from Isaac Deutscher, Leon Trotsky, and who else was that? Ernest Mandel. So Muqtada al-Sadr, born August 1974, is an Iraqi Shia Muslim cleric, politician, and militia leader. He is the leader of the Sadrist movement and the leader of the Peace Company, as a successor to the militia he had previously led during the American military presence in Iraq, the Mahdi Army. In 2018, he joined with Sadrist political party of the Sa-Iran Alliance, which won the highest number of seats in the 2018 and 2021 Iraqi parliamentary elections. I'm assuming this is Ismail Abdul Salam Ahmed Haniyeh, born January 1962, is a Palestinian politician who is widely considered to be the chief political leader of Hamas, which has governed the Gaza Strip since 2007. Ismail Abdul Salam Ahmed Haniyeh is the current chairman of the Hamas political bureau. As of 2023, Ismail Haniyeh, I think I'm saying his wrong name, Haniyeh, lives in Qatar. Ismail Haniyeh was born in the Al-Shati refugee camp in the Egyptian-occupied Gaza Strip in 1962. He studied at the Islamic University of Gaza, where he first became involved with Hamas and graduated with a bachelor's degree in Arabic literature in 1987. Appointed to head a Hamas office in 1997, Haniyeh has since grown in the ranks of the organization. Ismail Haniyeh was head of the Hamas list that won the Palestinian legislative election of 2006, and so became Prime Minister of the State of Palestine. However, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian National Authority, dismissed Haniyeh from his office on the 14th of June 2007 due to the ongoing Fatah-Hamas conflict. Haniyeh did not acknowledge Abbas's decree and continued to exercise prime ministerial authority in the Gaza Strip. Haniyeh is the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip from 2006 until February 2017, when he was replaced by Yahya Sinwar. On the 6th of May 2017, Haniyeh was elected chairman of Hamas's political bureau, replacing Khaled Mashal at the time. Haniyeh relocated to Qatar from the Gaza Strip. If you don't know, Qatar is where Al Jazeera is from. Hassan Nasrallah, born 1960, is a Lebanese cleric and Secretary General of Hezbollah, a Shia Islamist political party and militant group. Born into a Shia family in the suburbs of Beirut in 1960, Nasrallah finished his education in Tyre when he briefly joined the Amal movement and afterwards at a Shia seminary in Baalbek. Hassan Nasrallah later studied and taught at an Amal school. Hassan Nasrallah joined Hezbollah after the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon. After a brief period of religious studies in Iran, Nasrallah returned to Lebanon and became Hezbollah's leader after his predecessor was assassinated by an Israeli airstrike in 1992. Under Nasrallah's leadership, Hassan Nasrallah's leadership, Hezbollah acquired rockets with a longer range, which allowed them to strike at northern Israel. After Israel suffered heavy casualties during its 18-year occupation of southern Lebanon, it withdrew its forces in 2000, which greatly increased Hezbollah's popularity in the region and bolstered Hezbollah's position within Lebanon. However, Hezbollah's role in ambushing an Israeli border patrol unit leading up to the 2006 Lebanon War was subjected to local and regional criticism. During the Syrian civil war, Hezbollah fought on the side of the Syrian army in the strategic Syrian town of Qasir against what Hassan Nasrallah termed, quote, Islamist extremists, end quote. And Ahmadinejad, if you don't know who Ahmadinejad was, he was like the main leader of the prime minister, I guess would be his official position, of Iran. Yeah, he was the president of Iran from 2005 to 2013. So, back to the text. The Fanonist post-colonial emphasis was certainly emergent by the time Tariq Ali, the street-fighting man himself, enthused in 2006 of the ascendancy of Muqtada, Hania, Nasrallah, and Ahmadinejad, that, quote, a radical wind is blowing from the alleys and shacks of the latter-day wretched of the earth, end quote. The radicalism was, of course, in this rogues gallery, being, quote, anti-Western, end quote, as well as an unsqueamish enough to withstand the concerns of polite, quote, bourgeois philosophy, end quote. Like I said before, Tariq was affiliated with New Left Review, which had a publishing outlet called New Left Books, which became Verso Books. I don't know what his involvement with Verso Books is up to this day, but Tariq Ali, Verso Books published, a piece by published a collection of writings of Osama bin Laden. To be fair, to see what he actually had to say, And to be clear that, the Tariq Ali's interpretation of Trotskyism adhered to the idea that the USSR, even under Stalin and onward, and the states that came after Stalin, in during Stalin's reign in Eastern Europe, were degenerated worker states in the case of the Soviet Union and deformed worker states in the Soviet Union. So definitely has the idea that socialism is not the work of the emancipation of the working class must be conquered by the working class itself. His version of Marxism believes that the emancipation of the working class can be conquered by any totalitarian state that cares to nationalize private property. Back to the text. In a similar vein, come 7th of October, some were shocked that we were shocked. Najam Sharif, an American writer, tweeted, quote, "What did y'all think decolonization meant? Vibes, papers, losers?" Simi. What did you think, y'all? What did y'all, emphasize y'all, that's folksy, earthy, people-ish talk. Quote, "What did y'all think decolonization meant? Vibes, papers, essays, ? Losers." End quote. In a demotic echo of Robespierre's response to the Girondist Louvet's complaint about the excesses of the terror, quote, "Did you want a revolution without a revolution?" End quote. And there was not something of a tale of two cities. Madame Defarge about the real-time celebration of executions on Twitter. not Wikipedia, but it says on their website, it says Najam Sharif is a Somali American essayist, editor, and screenwriter currently between D.C. and New York City. Yeah. I don't know who they. It says Jean-Baptiste Louvet de Couvray was a French novelist, playwright, and journalist. Tale of Two Cities, that's a Charles Dickens novel, right? A Tale of Two Cities is a historical novel published in 1859 by Charles Dickens, set in London and Paris before and during the French Revolution. The novel tells the story of the French doctor Manet, his 18-year-long imprisonment in the Bastille in Paris, and his release to live in London with his daughter, Lucy, whom he had never met. The story is set against the conditions that led up to the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. As Dickens' best-known work of historical fiction, A Tale of Two Cities is said to be one of the best-selling novels of all time. In 2003, the novel was ranked 63rd on the BBC's The Big Read poll. The novel has been adapted to film, television, radio, and the stage, and has continued to influence popular culture. And it says, Madame Defarge is a fictional character and the main antagonist of the 1859 novel A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Madame Defarge is a ringleader of the Triquetus, a tireless worker for the French Revolution, memorably knitting beside the guillotine during executions. She is the wife of Ernst Defarge. Some historians have suggested that Dickens based Defarge on revolutionaries Thierry de Méricourt, who played a key role in street demonstrations, and Olympe de Gouges, known as Fury and founder of the Apocryphal Club of Knitting Women. Madame Defarge is one of the main villains of the novel, obsessed with revenge against the Evrémonde. She ruthlessly pursues this goal against Charles Darnay, his wife, Lucy Manette, and their children for crimes a prior generation of the Evrémonde family had committed. These include the deaths of her nephew, sister, brother, father, and brother-in-law. She refuses to accept the reality that Charles Darnay changed his ways by intending to renounce his title to the lands to give them to the peasants who worked on them. After Charles's arrogant and snobbish uncle becomes the Marquis Saint-Evrémonde, the Marquis's arrogance causes the death of an innocent child, which makes him hated and helps delegitimize Defarge's rage. Madame Defarge's consuming need for revenge against the Evrémonde family include the innocent Darnay and his wife, bring about her death by her own weapon at the hands of Miss Pross. So I guess you'd have to know the story for that to all make more sense, but back to the text. What was also evident the week of the 7th of October was the extent to which the massacre was, for some, not about real people and their slaughter at all, but rather a pseudo-scholarly dialectic. I'm somehow both chilled to the marrow and grasping for the painkillers when I reread the following from Harper's editor, Lake Mika, from the 8th of October. Quote, sorry. I'm not seeing anything for Lake Mika's Twitter page says Modern Prince of Temperament editing at Harper's. I'm not really seeing anything on him. If you don't know, I don't know Harper's. Harper's Magazine is a monthly magazine of literature, politics, culture, finance, and the arts, launched in New York City in June 1850. It is the oldest continuously published monthly magazine in the United States. Harper's Magazine won 22 National Magazine Awards. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the magazine published works of hugely prominent authors and political figures, including Herman Melville, Woodrow Wilson, and Winston Churchill. Willie Morris's resignation as editor in 1971 was considered a major event, and many other employees of the magazine resigned with him. The magazine was developed into the 21st century, adding several blogs. So that's Lake Mika and Harper's. This is what they had to say on the 8th of October. Quote, "To search for an analog seems almost inappropriate to Palestinians' world historical audacity to seize the components of self-determination for themselves, if only because the idiom of liberation invents itself anew with each instance that the yoke of bondage is sloughed off. We haven't seen much like this, even when we have, is my view. What this is or isn't exist in a bind that historical example can be of only some use to. But the contemporary assessment is unambiguous. Their righteousness of cause and singularity of circumstance are inextricable. A near century's pulverized overtures toward ethnic realization, of groping for a medium of existential latitude, these things culminate in drastic actions in need of no apologia. The thrum of history as it develops is one of force. Its inertia in advance requires some momentum." End quote. Jesus Christ. That was rough to listen to. I didn't quite understand when he said, somehow chilled to the marrow and grasping for the painkillers. I agree. It is like reading Lenin on a bad day, and Lenin had many. The hideousness of the message matched only by the thumping leadenness of the prose. Beyond the impenetrable jargon, at least some meaning can be gleaned. Dead Jews are nothing next to the, quote, thrum of history, end quote. Hat tip to @Prima Polly for his reply to Mika, quote, "You're defending mass rape by terrorists. Maybe take a step back from your multisyllabic pretentiousness and look at the reality of what you're defending," end quote. Even more to the pith of @Stonewall Arthur, who contented himself with a memed, quote, "What the fuck are you talking about?" end quote. Some were not content to enjoy the bloodshed by proxy, but seemed intent on joining in. Gemma DeCristo, assistant professor of American Studies at UC Davis, tweeted on the 10th of October that, quote, "Zionist journalists," end quote, "have, quote, houses with addresses in school. Kids in school. They can fear their bosses, but they should fear us more," end quote. The tweet ended with emojis of a knife, an axe, and drops of blood. Yeah, that's not hate speech either. Fucking idiot. The only thing I'm seeing is some fucking, like, right-wing, just, like, left thing. So I'm not really seeing anything One does not need fluency in the thudding, impenetrable semiotics. Back to the text. One does not need fluency in the thuddingly impenetrable semiotics of the postmodern left. The postmodern left substitutes for actual moral philosophy to spot the unavoidable meaning of all this. The only good Israeli is a dead Israeli, and any dead Israeli is good. I shall leave the examples here, having brought the reader only a flavor of the activist intellectual response and spared them the thousand upon thousands of tweets, etc., from the average Joe along similar lines. And it is just a flavor. Should you wish to be further depressed, read above all Alan Johnson's, quote, Progressives, end quote, and the Hamas Pogrom, an A to Z guide, and further complaints from Fathom alone. Nor do I pick on the individuals mentioned as being extraordinary. On the contrary, I note their contributions as being rather representative of a wider phenomenon. As such, the conclusion is unavoidable, that this is a movement and a cast of mind that have lost even the barest connection to the compassion and elementary decency which is the basis of any properly left politics. Only one rung down from the cheerleaders were the denialists, the quote, show me the evidence, end quote, the quote, show me the evidence, end quote, of rapers, and those who suddenly became experts in the Hannibal Protocol. Wikipedia says, the Hannibal Directive, also called the Hannibal Procedure or Hannibal Protocol, is the name of a controversial procedure that was used by Israeli defense forces until 2016 to prevent the capture of Israeli soldiers by enemy forces. Rain's coming down, gotta close the window. Need some water while I'm at it, you know? The Hannibal Directive, also known as the Hannibal Procedure or Hannibal Protocol, is the name of a controversial procedure that was used by Israeli defense forces until 2016 to prevent the capture of Israeli soldiers by enemy forces. According to one version, it says that, quote, the kidnapping must be stopped by all means, even at the price of striking and harming our own forces, end quote. It was introduced in 1986 after a number of abductions of IDF soldiers in Lebanon and subsequent controversial prisoner exchanges. The full text of the directive was never published until 2003. Israeli military censorship forbade any discussion of the subject in the press. The directive has been changed several times until it was officially revoked in 2016 by IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot. The directive's replacement has not been published. Two versions of the Hannibal Directive may have existed simultaneously at times. A written version accessible only to the upper echelons of the IDF, and a, quote, oral law, end quote, version for division commanders and lower levels. In the latter version, quote, by all means, end quote, was often interpreted literally as, in, quote, an IDF soldier was, quote, better dead than abducted, end quote. End quote. In 2011, IDF Chief of Staff Benny Gantz stated the directive does not permit killing IDF soldiers to prevent abduction. In case of the abduction of Gilad Shalit, invocation of the Hannibal Directive occurred too late to have any influence on the course of events. Israeli newspapers have reported that the IDF was issued orders echoing the wording of the Hannibal Directive during the 2023 Hamas-led attack on Israel. The IDF was ordered to prevent, quote, at all costs, end quote, the abduction of Israeli civilians or soldiers, possibly leading to the death of a large number of Israeli hostages. Back to the text. That's the Hannibal Protocol. The pattern of thinking here is remarkably similar to previous instances of what used to be called useful idiocy. The great Polish historian of Marxism, Leszek Kolakowski, observed how anyone in the West who said to the pro-Soviet left that there were concentration camps in the motherland was instantly labeled a, quote, cold warrior, end quote. And since a cold warrior was by definition wrong, ergo there are no camps in the Soviet Union. Bernard Shaw was a telling and early exponent of this malady. There could be no famine in the Soviet Union, he said, since he had never eaten so well as on his visit there. So too those who have tried to amplify the voices of the Israeli women's movement in drawing attention to the widespread sexual violence on the 7th of October are, of course, quote, Zionists, end quote. And since Zionists are all nefarious liars, there was no sexual violence. I genuinely do not know if the denialists sincerely believe their denials, or if it is simply a case of the God not being allowed to fail. If having established the Palestinian cause is righteous, which of course it is, it can only remain righteous if all evil done in its name is denied. Such an idea is of course ridiculous, but perhaps Nietzsche was right in thinking that, quote, man's dishonesty with himself is his greatest enemy. When he makes a mistake, his memory admits, quote, I have done this, end quote. But his pride opposes by saying, quote, I cannot have done this, end quote. And pride wins out over memory, end quote. As ever, Orwell was certainly right in his observing that, quote, atrocities are believed in or disbelieved in solely on grounds of political predilection. Everyone believes in the atrocities of the enemy and disbelieves in those of his own side, without ever bothering to examine the evidence, end quote. He saw plenty of this and would have none of it. Quote, these things really happened. That is the thing to keep one's eye on, end quote, Orwell insisted. And, quote, they happened even though Lord Halifax said they happened, end quote. The point being that something is not an invention of propaganda merely because one's opponent or enemy claims it to be true. I quite agree and might perhaps claim a modest amount of credit in having 3 times insisted to Israelis that disgraceful practices and odious arguments in the conduct of the war in Gaza must be faced. Footnote. See Alan Johnson and Jack Omer-Jackaman opinion for the total defeat of Hamas against the, quote, total siege, end quote, of Gaza, Fathom, October 2023, and Jack Omer-Jackaman, quote, what justice requires in Gaza, in Persuasion, the 13th of December 2023, and Jack Omer-Jackaman, quote, opinion, yes to recognizing a Palestinian state now, end quote, Fathom 2024. What Orwell would have made of Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek finance minister and hero of the anti-NATO left, assuring us that, quote, the criminals are not Hamas, the criminals are Europeans, end quote, is not hard to guess. I fucking hate Yanis Varoufakis. I think he's like such a fucking clown. He's not even particularly radical either. It's just like and it's just like kind of like one of those people who like constantly over exaggerates, like we're in a new phase of capitalism, like constantly adding like something to capitalism, like something like, oh, like, I don't know, techno capitalism or like disaster capitalism or like, you know, that's the Naomi Klein thing, but all kinds of like just like different capitalisms. And it's just like, God, dude, you're just fucking like but that's not related to this. It's just like an irritating thing. It's just like his endeavor with Marxist critique of political economy is like very thin and very and not deep, and not learning very much from an engagement with that critique. Anyway, not important here. Not that the anti-Zionists will care, but the shock and betrayal felt by the Israeli left continues to be palpable. Much of the anti-occupation left is like me backed Israel's duty to fight Hamas, but not the conduct of the war. Quote, all I want to say to the international left is, go to hell, end quote, ran the most unreasonable title of Israeli writer Lilac Volach's Cri de Coeur in the ultra-dovish Haaretz in late October. When I interviewed Fania Salzburger in early April, she was in shock and comforted only by the solidarity she had received from older social democratic leftists. Lilac Volach. I'm not really seeing anything. I'm seeing that she has things with Haaretz, but I'm not seeing any like biographical information. And Fania Os Salzburger. Let's see if there's anything for that. Fania Os Salzburger is an Israeli historian and writer, professor emerita of history at the University of Haifa School of Law and the Haifa Center for German and European Studies. I guess I should look up Haaretz, even though I know that Haaretz is like a center, it's like a liberal left newspaper in Israel. Haaretz, quote, news from the land of Israel, end quote, is an Israeli newspaper. Haaretz was founded in 1918, making it the longest-running newspaper currently in print in Israel. It is published in both Hebrew and English in the Berliner format. The English edition is published and sold together with the New York Times International edition. Haaretz's Hebrew and English editions are available on the internet. In North America, Haaretz is published as a weekly newspaper, combining articles from the Friday edition with a roundup from the rest of the week. Haaretz is Israel's newspaper of record. It is known for its left-wing and liberal stances on domestic and foreign issues. As of 2022, Haaretz has the third largest circulation in Israel. It is widely read by international observers, especially in its English edition, and discussed in the international press. According to the Center for Research Libraries, among Israel's daily newspapers, quote, Haaretz is considered the most influential and respected for both its news coverage and its commentary. Anyway, back to the text. Hebrew University professor Ava Luz. Ava Luz, I think, does a lot in like the history of emotions and the sort of like the sociology of emotions, and she has a really good thing about populism in Israel, and I can't really remember, so I don't want to misquote her, but the way she makes it sound was like a lot of like, there's kind of like a political division within Israel between like, I guess like Tel Aviv area, it's just like more liberal and left wing and like cosmopolitan, and then like people like I guess like closer like to Jerusalem is not. And the way she makes it sound, the way she made it sound is that like a large part, like a large part of Netanyahu's support base, like the populism that he whips, like Israeli populism that is like kind of like the base of his support, is like at least partial. Is like there's a very large like a number of people from like Arab Israeli background. Like Mizrahi Jews. But I can't absolutely be certain of that, which is ironic considering that like I think that there was like a left movement like the Black Panthers in Israel were like I believe they're like Mizrahi Jews who were looking for like equal rights and within Israeli society. But it seems like a large number of people from that background have more conservative. I'm not exactly sure. I might be talking out my ass entirely. Are more susceptible to the populism and the kind of like hardlinism of the Netanyahu government than you would expect. Anyway, his Hebrew University professor Ava Luz, in a fine article, made clear that from their respective reactions to the massacre, anti-occupation Israelis should now look to Arab Israelis who, quote, have shown the compassion the doctrinal left has so shockingly lacked. They have stood by our side. It is them with whom we must build a party of humanity determined to bring justice and peace. The global left has made itself irrelevant from now on, end quote. The anti-occupation left should have been looking more to Arab Israelis for a long time, but this is another matter. It says Eva Luz, who's from Morocco, was born in 1961 in Morocco, is a professor of sociology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the School of Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences in Paris. Eva Illouz was the first woman president of the Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design. But yeah, if you look up her talks, they're very interesting. Back to the text. Cooperation and the utilitarian ethic being far beneath them, the anti-Zionists have as little interest in supporting potential comrades in Israel as they do in genuine peace and the hard work that is essential to peace. They are quite clear by their own words that anything so practical or moderate as two states is far beneath them, and that nothing short of the eradication of the state of Israel will sate their appetite, though such is their obsession with what they would miss it were it gone. They cheer the Palestinians on from a safe distance, of course, to a full reconquest of Palestine that is hateful for being inevitably murderous and doubly so for being utterly delusional. The Israeli anti-occupation left are nothing and nobodies. Zionism's useful idiots, while brave activists like those at Standing Together fail the purity test as quisling normalizers. Standing Together, its website says, Stand Together is a grassroots movement mobilizing Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel in pursuit of peace, equality, and social and climate justice. While the minority who benefit from the status quo of occupation and economic inequality seek to keep us divided, we know that we, the majority, have more in common than that which sets us apart. When we stand together, we are strong enough to fundamentally alter the existing socio-political reality. The future that we want, peace and independence for Israelis and Palestinians, full equality for all citizens, and true social, economic, and environmental justice, is possible because where there is struggle, there is hope. So that's Standing Together. New section back to the piece. New section on campus. With so much of this hellacious bullshit in the academy, can it be surprised when it percolates down to the student body? Emerging minds should not be judged by the same standards as those who are fully deformed. Formed, it says, and then it says in parentheses, deformed. Of course, and nor do I want to fish for a trawler's net, with a trawler's net, when what is always required with the identification of anti-Semitism, when what is always required with the identification of anti-Semitism is the long line. Many people actively protesting the war in Gaza are simply furious and heartbroken at a truly brutal 8-month conflict, and outrage at the evisceration of Gaza speaks well of them. Except, it might reasonably said, when it follows or is accompanied by denial, evasion, and outright rejoicing at 7th of October or the explicit championing of Hamas. Then might we not justly conclude that what motivates those protesters is not a humanistic desire for peace, justice, and an end to bloodshed, but rather the prospect of the 7th of October redux. Améry was rather charitable to the youthful naivety of those who in his own time mirrored many of today's campus protesters. Quote, the young leftists will surely reject with disdain, end quote. Améry wrote, quote, the suggestion that their anti-Zionism incorporates elements of crude anti-Semitism, and quite rightly so. ... Yet, as our young would-be Marx experts should surely know, given the objective historical situation, individual intentions and goals as such count for little. The seedbed in which the young left operates with its anti-Zionist fur nurtures the sprouts of a centuries-old anti-Semitism, which has been anything but, quote, mastered, end quote. Somewhere, every, quote, down with the Zionist oppression, end quote, finds an echo sounding remarkably like, quote, perish Judah, end quote. We might even, Jean Améry, we might even allow that there is some naivety at work, even a certain amount of Fedayeen cosplay. Fedayeen is an Arabic for self-sacrificers, is an Arabic term used to refer to various military groups willing to sacrifice themselves for a larger campaign. Chanting for intifada is, after all, rather easier if you did not live through the campaign of mass suicide murder accompanying the second iteration, or through the severe Israeli crackdown of defensive shield. Wikipedia says, Operation Defensive Shield was a 2002 Israeli military operation in the West Bank carried out amidst the Second Intifada. Lasting for just over a month, it was the largest combat operation in the West Bank since the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, when Israel seized the territory from Jordan. Israel's stated goal for the escalation was to stop Palestinian terrorist attacks. The operation was launched 2 days after the Passover massacre, in which a Palestinian suicide bomber attacked the Park Hotel in Netanya, killing 30 civilians while injuring 140 more. The operation began with an Israeli incursion into Ramallah, where Yasser Arafat was placed under siege at his compound. This was followed by successive incursions into the six largest cities in the West Bank and their surrounding localities. Israel's military moved into Tulkarm and Kalkilia on April 1st, into Bethlehem on April 2nd, and into Jenin and Nablus on April 3rd. From April 3rd to 21st, strict curfews were enforced on civilian populations in the West Bank, and international personnel had their movement restricted, including at times prohibition of entry to humanitarian and medical personnel, as well as human rights monitors and journalists. In May 2002, Israeli troops withdrew from Palestinian cities in the West Bank while maintaining cordons of troops around certain towns and villages, and also continued to carry out raids on Palestinian-populated areas. The United Nations report on the subject states, quote, combatants on both sides conducted themselves in ways that at times placed civilians in harm's way. Much of the fighting during Operation Defensive Shield occurred in areas heavily populated by civilians, and in many cases heavy weaponry was used, end quote. Back to the text. Yes, there are very Western displays. These are very Western displays, quote, a violent revolution turning to myth, end quote, Améry noted, quote, only where for good reasons it cannot, will, and not take place, ... end quote. In such cases, quote, the armed rebellion in the name of human emancipation has become a petrified myth and aestheticized slogan, end quote. But Améry also knew that, quote, silliness is by no means invariably harmless, end quote. So forgive us if we do not treat as benign, laudable even chants like, quote, we don't want two states, what we want is, quote, 48, end quote. Quote, no justice, no peace, ... intifada, globalize the intifada, end quote. Quote, long live Palestine, Palestine forever, from the river to the sea, end quote. Quote, red, black, green, and white, we support Hamas's fight, end quote. Quote, Hitler, Hitler, go back home, Palestine is ours alone, end quote. Quote, Al-Qassam, you make us proud, kill another soldier now, end quote. Say it, quote, say it loud, say it clear, we do not want Zionists here, end quote. Quote, oh, Al-Qassam, you make us proud, kill another soldier now, end quote. Quote, resistance by any means necessary, end quote. Quote, Palestine is our demand, no peace on stolen land, end quote. Quote, we say justice, you say how, burn Tel Aviv to the ground, end quote. In the era of microaggressions, a neologistic concept to which I am far more sympathetic than nearly all on the, quote, pro-Israel, end quote, side, might we conclude that these aggressions are somewhat more than micro, and that it is egregious to ask Jewish students to circumvent these deafening cauldrons just in order to receive their hugely expensive education. This war has indeed been a horror show. Sunday's deadly inferno at the temporary camp in Rafah, the latest utterly and depressingly predictable agony. It has been prosecuted at the political level by fools and knaves with neither concern for Gazan life nor anything approaching a coherent strategy. I support its genesis unequivocally and loathe its prosecution equally vehemently, and have said so publicly in print on 3 occasions. I cannot join the protesters on the barricades for the elemental reason that too many of them have explicitly sanctioned the murder of my friends. Pretty basic stuff, really. If faced with Columbia student protest leader Kimani James, in fact, it would be as much self-interest as fraternal solidarity that caused me to run. Kimani James, 20, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist student and educator supporting and teaching liberation everywhere, free Palestine. That's what Kimani James's Twitter profile says. So I'm not really seeing like a straight up bio of Kimani Jones, but back to the text. For James would murder me too. Quote, Zionists don't deserve to live, end quote, you see. James assures us that, quote, I don't fight to injure or for there to be a winner or a loser. I fight to kill, end quote. But I am not much mollified by the thought that my end would be quick. The Columbia disciplinary panel to which James spoke these words was apparently rather less concerned than I, since they acted only when the clip went viral. Show me a protest which hates the war and Hamas in equal measure, which seeks desperately a free Palestine alongside a secure Israel, which is possessed of moral clarity and a belief in the sanctity of all innocent life. I will be there, placard in hand, in a heartbeat. There has been no such protest because there is no anti-war left presently capable of it. A note to them, if you want to see how it is done, follow the extraordinary exiled Gazan writer Ahmad Fuad al-Khatib. Ahmad Fuad al-Khatib, born 1990, is a Palestinian-American humanitarian activist and blogger. Ahmad Fuad al-Khatib is the founder and executive director of Project Unified Assistance, a nonprofit organization working towards the establishment of a humanitarian airport in the Gaza Strip to be run and operated by the United Nations. Back to the text. Al-Khatib has so far lost 31 members of his extended family to the war and manages to hate and protest it while inveighing against the evils of Hamas, consequently making many enemies amongst other supposed proponents of the Palestinian cause who would justify the 7th of October. His is a truly moral position. New section. A left that can account for Shani. The road to this squalid reaction to the 7th of October has been a long one, with many a disastrous turn leading the far left into ever more dangerous and bankrupt territory. It is what happens when dogma becomes more fashionable than critical thought, when radicalism trumps reason, when the antidote to Orientalism is taken to be Occidentalism, when the counter to cultural imperialism is moral relativism, when it is, quote, better to be wrong with Sartre than right with Iran, end quote, when Foucault decides for us all that Iranian women and Iranian Democrats can go to hell, the Ayatollah is, after all, just too damned exciting. Yes, the present swamp was fed by myriad fetid tributaries. So too does it inevitably become more and more contaminated. Generations raised on blather masquerading as profundity and on nihilism masquerading as radical chic. The next generation has far exceeded Butler in both irrationality and the explicitness of its contempt for Israeli life. Butler at least offered a condemnation of the 7th of October of sorts, though it was still, quote, armed resistance, end quote, not, quote, terrorism, end quote, only to find that the beast they have played not inconsiderable part in creating now considered them rather a cop-out. Your sons and daughters are beyond your command, ... That's a reference to Bob Dylan's song, Times They Are A-Changin'. Yes, the left of the 21st century needed the children of Victor Serge and Sophie Scholl and Nye Bevan, Dr. King and Nye Bevan. Too many places has it received instead the children of Nachiev and Che, of Mao and Ulrika Meinhof. For many, this treason has led to self-imposed exile and auto-excommunication from the left. For me, as for Améry before me, this is impossible. Whether we're capable of a consequential renaissance remains to be seen. It is a Sisyphean task, and one which the 7th of October has shown us cannot be left to the gatekeepers. No, as Améry noted, quote, the answer must come not so much from those who hold positions of responsibility, but primarily from those possessed of an actual sense of responsibility, end quote. Go with Orwell if you prefer, and that the answer lies with the proles. The wait may be a long one. In the meantime, I would encourage the emerging leftist who senses something wrong in all this, but is not quite sure where to begin by adapting the famous proposition of Rabbi Greenberg. After the Holocaust, said the rabbi, quote, no statement, theological or otherwise, should be made that would not be credible in the presence of the burning children, end quote. Well, henceforth, brook no statement from the left on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that would not be credible if uttered on the truck with Shani. It is the best, perhaps it is all you can do for her now. I'm not really seeing what Greenberg is being referred to. There's a Greenberg that's like younger. I think I'm finding the right one. The person, who did I want to look up? Who's Nye Bevan? I should know that. Is Nye Bevan the guy, like the reformer in England? Is he the NHS guy? Aneurin Bevan was a Welsh Labour Party politician noted for tenure as Minister of Health in Clement Attlee's government, in which he spearheaded the creation of the British National Health Service. Nye Bevan is also known for his wider contribution to the founding of the British welfare state. Nye Bevan was first elected as MP for Ebb Vale in 1928 and used his parliamentary platform to make a number of influential criticisms of Winston Churchill and his government during the Second World War. Before entering Parliament, Bevan was involved in minor unions politics and was a leading figure in the 1926 general strike. Bevan is widely regarded as one of the most influential left-wing politicians in British history. Raised in Monmouthshire by a Welsh working-class family, he was the son of a coal miner and left school at 14. Bevan first worked as a miner during his teens, where he became involved in local miners' union politics. He was elected head of his miners' lodge when aged 19, where he frequently rallied against management. He joined the Labour Party and attended the Central Labour College in London. On his return to South Wales, he struggled to find work, remaining unemployed for nearly 3 years before gaining employment as a union official, which led to him becoming a leading figure in the 1926 general strike. In 1928, Nye Bevan won a seat on Monmouthshire County Council, and he was elected as MP for Ebb Vale the following year. He served as an MP for 31 years. In Parliament, Nye Bevan became a vocal critic of numerous other politicians from all parties, particularly Winston Churchill and David Lloyd George. After the war, Nye Bevan was chosen as Minister of Health in Clement Attlee's new Labour government, becoming the youngest member of the cabinet at 47. With Nye Bevan's remit also including housing. Inspired by the Tredegar Medical Aid Society in his hometown in South Wales, Nye Bevan led the campaign for a national health service to provide medical care free at point of need across the UK, regardless of wealth. Despite the resistance from opposition parties and the British Medical Association, the National Health Service Act of 1946 was passed and launched in 1948, nationalizing more than 2,500 hospitals in the United Kingdom. Bevan was named Minister of Labour in 1951, but resigned after 2 months when the Attlee government proposed the introduction of prescription charges for dental and vision care and decided to transfer funds from the National Insurance Fund to pay for rearmament. Nye Bevan's influence waned after his departure, though a left-wing group within the party became known as, quote, Bevanites, end quote. Attlee and Labour were ousted from power in a snap election held 6 months after Bevan's resignation, but Attlee continued on as Labour Party leader. When Attlee retired from leadership in 1955, Nye Bevan unsuccessfully contested the party leadership with Hugh Gaitskell, and was appointed Shadow Colonial Secretary and later Shadow Foreign Secretary. In 1959, he was elected deputy leader of the Labour Party and held the post for a year until his death from stomach cancer at the age of 62. Bevan's death in 1960 led to a, quote, outpouring of national mourning, end quote. In 2004, more than 44 years after his death, he was voted first in the list of 100 Welsh heroes, having been credited for his contribution to the founding of the welfare state in the UK. So that's Nye Bevan. And that's the end of the essay. I thank you for listening, and thank you for listening to all the references that I looked up. I learned a lot during this and was made aware of new things, and I hope that you were too. Thank you.